I've started live streaming now, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning. This is the Environment and Economy Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
I've started live streaming now, Chair.
Sorry, just for a moment, I lost my screen then, so I couldn't see anything. Just a big right. Anyway, good morning. This is the Environment, Economy Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Tuesday, 11th of March. I'm Councillor David Evans, and we shall start the agenda with agenda item 1, which is appointment of vice chair. Do we have any nominations? Councillor Richard Lloyd. You're on mute, Richard.
Yeah, just trying to find the button there, Chair. I'd like to propose Councillor Ryan McGowan, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder for that? Oh, Councillor Mel Buckley, seconded. Thank you very much. Councillor Dan Rose.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Coggins-Cogan, please. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a bit.
Okay. Do you have a seconder for that? Councillor Richardson, I could see. Okay, we'll take any other nominations? Okay, if we take that to a vote. So can I have a show of hands from committee members of those in favour of Councillor Ryan McEwen? 3. Okay, 1, 2. It's difficult to see on the here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. Is it, I can't see Ryan. Oh yeah, fine. 5. Okay. Those in favour of Councillor Coggins-Cogan? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5 apiece, and I will use my casting vote in favour of Councillor Ryan McEwen. So we'll appoint Councillor Ryan McEwen as the vice chair of the committee. Okay, congratulations, Councillor McEwen. Okay, moving on to agenda item 2. Any apologies received?
Chair, excuse me, we've had an apology from Councillor Ros Mansell and 1 substitution, Councillor Sean Bibby for Councillor Vicky Perfect. Thank you. Okay,
thank you. Agenda item 3, any declarations of interest, including whipping declarations? Any members wishing to declare anything? No indication, no sign. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 4, the forward work programme and action tracking. I'll hand over to Margaret.
Thank you, Chair. So if we look at the forward work programme, there's just an addition for the April meeting. That's there'll be a report on the coastal path. And we are also looking to incorporate a report on duty of care for waste, which was due to come to the last meeting, but that needs to be rescheduled. So that's likely to be either May or June. The reports in July, they're now going to be, the annual report will no longer incorporate the council plan end of year. It'll be 2 separate reports going forward. And then, excuse me, just a heads up as well, on the 10th and the 11th of April, we have the 3 weekly collection round information drop-ins. I think Katie wanted to say something about that.
Okay, Katie.
I think we might have lost Katie.
I was going to say, I can't see her.
No.
Okay, Councillor Dolphin, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's on the forward work programme for April. It's the coastal park that's going to be on the agenda. Very exciting news. Coastal park, not the national park, coastal park.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Banks.
Thank you, Chair. I know Katie was going to come in about the 3 weekly, change over to 3 weekly, so just going to piggyback off this with your, if you don't mind, please, Chair.
Yeah.
It's just that you know, we're doing it with the rollout. All members have been asked about if they got any appropriate events on in their wards. The team would love to come along to any that you've got, or any that you know in your area. I know some have been promoting them, even if they're not supportive of what what's going, which is great. But they'll come out weekdays, weekends, and evenings, so that they can come out time to suit anybody really. And they're a fantastic team. They'll do a short presentation on it, and I mean, I've done a pile of them here, and I've mixed them in with hubs, coffee mornings, you name it. Any event that's been on, I've piggybacked on it and put one of these on the place to get it around. So we would love every member of this committee to come forward. I mean, some already have, some would be fantastic. Everyone here and all the members to please support this.
Okay.
All right, Chair. That's it.
Thank you. Margaret hadn't actually quite finished the forward work programme and action tracking, so I'll allow her to finish first, and then I'll bring the other members in.
Thank you, Chair. So moving on to the action tracking, we've got a few of these have been completed. I'll just talk through some of them. So the 30th of April, 10 a.m. will be the 20-mile-per-hour exception members briefing. There'll be a 10 a.m. in person in the auditorium in Dewi Sant, and then we'll have a 6 p.m. on Zoom. I'm just waiting for the purpose for that, and then I will be sending out an invite to you all. As it says here, the grass and weed control performance review, that is the workshop, that is work in progress. We are looking to have it later in the year, and hopefully with a site visit, so we can go and have a look at the one of the country parks. The Chief Officer did speak to Councillor Ros Mansell. That's towards the end of page 14. And then all the items on the forward work programme, they have been put into the forward programme under the words either in the programme or under the items to be scheduled. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret. Okay, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on the action tracking. So one of the items on the forward planning was the parking at Wepper Park, which actually is in Councillor Mansell's ward. Not mine, but I've spoke about it at a previous meeting. Also, a TRO around Connorskey High School that's been rumbling on since 2022. And it's just more of a generalisation, really, because I believe other councils are experiencing the same issue. Could we request a report from the Chief Officer on ensuring that these TROs are proceeded quicker in future? Would that be possible?
Okay. Can I just see if Katie's available to?
Yes, I am, Chair. I'm not clear really what you want to report on, or whether this is a ward issue. And you know, obviously we've only got a very small team of officers who deal with TROs, and they've been very much preoccupied with the 20-mile-an-hour rollout over the last 4 years. So it is having an impact on our ability to progress TROs quickly. We have got a programme, we have got a priority list as well for those TROs. But, I've literally got 2 people. So I'm not really clear what you would want to report on.
Okay, thanks, Katie. I'll try and explain a bit better. It's just that, so the parking at Wepper Park just seems to have disappeared off the forward planning altogether. If we look at, I was hopefully not wanting to go into too much detail, but if we look on the January meeting, page 584, 585, it said that consultations for all stakeholders will be complete early Feb, review of outcome mid to late Feb, and advertisements of off-street parking order will be advertised early March. It says there's going to be a public consultation online through the Flintshire County Council website, online via social media. It's just I don't see that happening. So how does it just disappear off the forward working plan?
Okay. Chair, if I may come in, it's obviously we took the report, which has had approval. There's a process to follow now. I think it's something we need to take offline to discuss with Councillor Richardson separately, and I'll need to understand from the team where progress is up to in terms of the timescales that were set out in the report. But I don't think it's a report for scrutiny. We've already got the implementation plan and the approval to proceed.
Okay, thank you. If we can do that between now and the next meeting, then obviously, Councillor Richardson, if we're not satisfied with that, then maybe it's something we can raise at the next meeting. But in the meantime, obviously, Katie and the team will speak with yourself. And if it's useful for the rest of the members, then obviously please ensure we're copied in. Is that okay?
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Katie.
Okay. Councillor Marshall, you want to put forward something for the forward work programme or speak on something for the action tracking?
It's just a query. Thank you, Chair. In section 1.01 in the report, it says items feed into a committee's forward work programme from a number of sources. Members can suggest topics for review by overview and scrutiny committees. I've seen a recent post on Facebook by a member who says, I'll just read parts of it. Whilst making formal recommendations and adding things to the work plan can be useful, more often than not, just questioning officers is far more effective. Officers have appealed to me not to add things to the work plan in the first instance, as it can be a distraction from their day jobs. That statement there seems to be at odds with 1.01. I've put forward suggestions in the housing for items for considered, and it had quite an immediate effect. Got contacted by the officer straight away, so I can't see any issues with submitting things to the forward work plan. Could you provide some clarification, please?
I'm not sure. What's
Chair,
if you wanted to submit something for the forward work plan?
Chair, that was my Facebook comment, so maybe I could explain it for Councillor Marshall's elucidation, if that helps. I think as it's sort of fairly clear in my post, what I said was, whilst adding things to the forward work programme can be useful, what can be equally as useful in certain circumstances is to have a conversation with an officer, as I have done. I'm not sure what the confusion is, Councillor Marshall. So, maybe if you can explain it to me rather than shaking your head, that'd be useful for everyone. But instead of adding things to the forward work programme, which adds work onto the officers, they have to produce a report. When I've suggested adding things before, I have been approached by officers, and they said, well, actually, instead of adding it to the forward work programme, and we've got to sort of go through a report, can we just try and bed this scheme in or whatever it is and sort of get back to you later on and make sure we iron out the issues first? And I've agreed to that. So it's a way of saying there's a formal route and there's also an informal route, and it's up to our judgment over which route we go down. I wasn't suggesting for a second that we don't add things to the forward work programme. What my post is saying is that as members, we use our judgment and discretion to decide what we ask to go into the forward work programme. I hope that explains everything, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think obviously if something can be sorted out, without being formalised, and if it's specific to a particular ward area, then that's useful, I suppose. But
can I come back on that? I can't see all the words that you've said there on the post. So,
okay.
I'll leave it like that. So
okay, thank you for that. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Came to my attention a couple of weeks ago that we'd agreed as part of the rollout of the 3-weekly collections that officers would commence door knocking. I understand that is not now taking place. I understand there are reasons, perhaps the Chief Officer can enlighten us, but that decision to stop the door knocking didn't come through the scrutiny when we'd already agreed that would take place, and we've had no information about that. So I'd like to understand why it was stopped, and if it has been stopped, is there a alternative about leafleting. Councillors put their newsletters out various times of the year to their constituents to let them know what's going on. So if there is no door knocking taking place, is there a leaflet campaign instead? And one other thing that it's for clarification, whether it goes onto the forward work program, I don't know, but because we live in a semi-rural area in my constituency, a lot of activities taking place on farmers' fields, and the roads have just been covered in mud, and I have to applaud the area coordinator for acting quickly and trying to resolve the issue. But that then begs the question that, you know, someone is putting the mud on the road, but it seems that the county council has to pick up the tab for putting a cleaning machine on the road. But unfortunately, a couple of days later when it rained, it was all bad again. And then I was told, well, it's a police matter, not a council matter. So could we have some clarification on whether it's a police matter or a council matter? And I'm just concerned about the use of council funds to clean a road that's been caused by a third party. I don't know whether this is experienced in other areas, but it's certainly food for thought that, you know, we shouldn't be picking up the tab for something that someone else has caused.
Thank you for that, Councillor Pearce. Can I just ask Katie if she can got any on the three
Yeah,
door knocking and a
yeah.
comment on the roads?
Yeah, the door knocking was pulled on health and safety grounds due to threats and abuse received from residents towards our staff. So we had to pull it on those grounds. We have put alternatives in place and we are taking up the suggestion of member newsletters. So what we're waiting for is the calendars at the moment. As soon as we've got the calendars, we've got information packs that are ready to go out. I'll take the opportunity also to mention that we are organising drop-in sessions for all members at the depot, and the dates are the 10th and the 11th of April, where you'll be invited to come in and view those information packs and the calendars for your respective wards. The calendars are due to be delivered to us in about 2 weeks' time, subject to the printers. So we're ready to go in terms of issuing those calendars, and we've already received the information packs and leaflets that are ready to go out to all residents as well. We are also, as Councillor Banks referred to earlier on, hosting a number of drop-in events. So I think we've held over 30 events so far since our last scrutiny meeting. They're literally doing about 20 a week at the moment. So if you have suggestions of events in your particular wards, we'd like to hear from you so that we can tap into those events and come along and support you. The team, we've had a lot of positive feedback at the events about the recycling officers and the team, and those events have actually been well attended as well by residents. So, and we're not getting the same level of animosity at those events either. In terms of the second item you mentioned, Councillor Pearce, I could do with some clarification whether you want that to go on the forward work programme or you want a response offline. It's obviously our duty as a local authorities towards the safety aspects and maintaining safe passage for all road users. So we have to make sure that that road is safe. In terms of whether, I don't know the specifics around the incident you're referring to, so maybe that's something I can pick up offline with you. Barry is also on the call from the highway network, and there are processes in place for dealing with complaints around mud on the roads, and where we can actually issue notice as well to private contractors or farmers. So I don't know whether that's something you want to go on the forward work programme as an action.
Yeah, I think what Councillor Coggins said before, I don't think we need to take up time on the forward work programme. I think if we can tag this on to the next time we have a highways item, tag this on, because it was particularly bad. And again, how do we transfer the cost? Because you couldn't leave it. Something had to be done, and I'm sure in other rural areas it does happen. I assume it does. I don't know whether it does, but rather than take up time on the forward work programme, if we can tag this on to a highways item when we look at it in the future, that'd be okay. But I will update you outside the meeting anyway.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Pearce. Okay, as obviously this is, I see a lot of hands going up. We're still on the forward work programme and action tracking. This is the bit we're addressing. So if we have items for the forward work programme or questions on the action tracking, then this is the point we do it. I don't want to get into a general debate on everything. Okay, Councillor Richard Lloyd.
Well, thanks, Chair. Action tracking. There you go. Placemaking plans booklet to be considered at the May meeting, which is great. And I'm really pleased. I did say it before the meeting started, but for the record, I wanted to say it again, that following my intervention in February, asking why it wasn't included in the placemaking plans, I'm pleased to say that Niall Waller has arranged to meet myself and Councillor Shawcross just to look at possible for future inclusion in this placemaking plan. So I'd just like to thank Niall again for arranging to meet myself and Councillor Shawcross to see if we can benefit from being included in the placemaking plan. Regarding the door knocking, I just wanted to say that looking at myself and Councillor Shawcross managed to do lots of door knocking before the ban came in. I can understand why it's had to stop, but pleased to say that we will be in the process of organising a drop-in at the local community centre for residents that we haven't door knocked to come along and get the recycling and tell them a bit more about it. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Coggins-Cogan.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to ask Margaret if she could repeat the date of the 20-mile-an-hour members' workshop. I noted down the time, so I didn't get the date.
Yeah, that's the 30th of April. So 10 o'clock in person and 6 p.m. on Zoom. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Casey just mentioned there about the calendars being printed. Are they available electronically? Because I've got a deadline of 31st of March for our newsletter. Thank you.
Okay, Katie?
Yes, they will be. I think they will be ready for your deadline, but I will need to confirm, and so I'll do that separately outside the meeting if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much, members. Margaret, anything to add there, or
No, that's everything. If we could move to the recommendations, please, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, and the recommendations as on page 5, the three of them that you will see there. Committee can consider the draft forward work programme in consultation with the chair of the committee to vary the forward work programme as our needs arises, and the committee notes the progress made. Can I have a show of hands in favour of that? Okay, that looks pretty unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is a draft climate change strategy, and I'll hand over to Chief Officer Andrew Farrow initially.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. This report and report that number 6, the placemaking plans, are both on the way to Cabinet next week. So we're looking for your comments on both of these reports. This first one is the review of the climate change strategy that was previously adopted following the resolution to be a carbon neutral council. And we've got Alex Ellis, Climate Change Strategy Manager, on the line. And Alex, you're going to share some slides, I think, with us and talk us through the changes, what you've found in the time that you've been here and the changes that you're proposing in terms of the review of the strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Hello, Alex. You're okay to carry on?
Yeah, thank you, members. I'll just share my screen. Bear with me a moment. Okay, can you see that okay?
We can see it fine, thank you.
Brilliant. So thank you for your time this morning. I just wanted to present some slides which give an overview of the changes that we've made to the reviewed strategy To start with, we carried out a number of engagement activities last year, both internally and externally as part of the strategy review. This included workshops both with members and senior leaders across the council. And we had a public engagement period from July to September, including an online survey and a number of public engagement events. We carried out a number of young persons engagement with both the Youth Council and individual schools, which was really successful. And then we followed this up with internal portfolio workshops to feedback on the current strategy aims and what can be done differently, and how each portfolio contributes to that strategy. And then the officer working groups for each of the key themes within the strategy work through the action plan, and kind of realign the actions in terms of what we can achieve, what's realistic for us to achieve, but still ambitious as a council. Just to give an overview of the council's emissions since we've been collecting that data in 2018-19, which is our baseline here. You can see from this bar chart that we've generally seen a reduction from the different coloured emissions, but the light blue bar shows quite a considerable ebb and flow throughout the years. Now, this light blue bar is our supply chain, and by it demonstrates the sort of volatile nature of the data that we have around supply chain and the methodology that keeps changing, that helps us to determine what the carbon emissions are from our supply chain. If we remove that supply chain element from our data, you can see that we've seen a reduction year on year, which is really positive. Since our baseline year, we've reduced our emissions by approximately 30%, and we've seen reductions across all the emission sources. Buildings has the greatest success out of those, and that's seen a 27.2% reduction. So that really demonstrates the work that we've put into energy efficiency across our non-domestic buildings. Within the revised strategy, we've retained the 5 key themes that we had previously. So buildings, mobility and transport, land use, procurement, and that overarching theme of behaviour. I'm just going to go through the notable amendments to the revised strategy. So the first is the removal of a quantitative reduction target for supply chain emissions. So as I mentioned previously, and you'll all be familiar with this from previous reports that have come to the committee, there's been changes in the methodology since the baseline year, and this relies on spend value to calculate emissions from this source. What this means is that if the council spends more money, then it's anticipated that the emissions have increased. By using this spend value methodology, the only way that we could reduce the amount of emissions from spend is by spending less money, and as a council we still have to provide services, and so it's very difficult for us to, and very unreliable for us to use a spend value methodology for emissions. So the revised strategies remove this quantifiable reduction target, and instead what we're doing is we're focusing on those real tangible material outputs that can be achieved by continuing to work with our commissioning officers and our suppliers to influence change. And that's where the real change will come from supply chain. The figures at the moment don't really mean anything, they don't really add value to us. So putting a quantitative target towards them will just be setting us up to fail at the moment. So in lieu of there being a more accurate methodology, and we have used actual carbon emission data that we receive from some of the big capital projects that we've had, and that's demonstrated the real significant difference between the real carbon emissions and what is calculated using the spend value methodology. So we'll continue to really work hard within internally with our commissioning officers, but also with our suppliers to influence change in that area. But we will be removing that quantitative reduction target from supply chain. The second amendment is a carbon reduction trajectory in line with Science-Based Targets Initiative. So Science-Based Targets Initiative is an international methodology, and it defines and promotes best practice in emissions reductions and net zero targets in line with climate science. So if you look on the graph on the screen, that first section, the blue line, that indicates our actual carbon emissions from 2018 to 24, and this excludes supply chain emissions now. The yellow dotted line, which comes all the way to 2050, this is the Science-Based Targets Initiative trajectory. So this demonstrates the Council's carbon reduction pathway if it were to meet the Science-Based Targets Initiative reduction targets. And we've set the trajectories to a near-term year of 2030 and then a net zero year of 2050. And that aligns with preventing the global temperature increase of 1.5 degrees as per the Paris Agreement. The dotted red line, which you can see coming from 2024-25 up to 2030, that shows the 2030 forecast. And this is the estimation of what reductions we feel we can make by fulfilling the actions that we have in our action plan by 2030, should there be the resources to do so. And then the green line, which you can see dips down to 2030, that is the net zero carbon 2030 trajectory. So this is demonstrating the pace of change needed to be a net zero carbon council by 2030. Now, what the graph demonstrates is that the 2030 forecast scenario aligns really well with the science-backed SBTi near-term targets. So we have really good confidence that completing the actions within the action plan are aligned with science. Achievement of this is obviously subject to necessary funding and resources being available. The disparity between the 2030 forecast and that net zero carbon by 2030 trajectory, that's caused by factors outside of the Council's control, and we'll come back to that in a few slides' time, where we look at constraints and interdependencies. The next notable amendment is revised reduction targets, and this is in line with the SBTi and the predicted reductions from the actions that are within the Council's control. So the 2018-19 column shows our baseline figures. So we had 10,747 tonnes of CO2 emissions from buildings, and then 6,716 tonnes of CO2 equivalent from mobility and transport. In 2023-24, we had achieved 29.6% reduction in buildings and a 20.4% reduction in mobility and transport. The SBTi target gives us a 55% reduction in 2029-30 in both buildings and mobility and transport. So we've set interim targets of 45% in 26-27 for buildings and 35% for mobility and transport. Now, the lower interim target for mobility and transport is to allow for time to resolve the current constraints that we have around decarbonisation of fleet and the EV charging infrastructure across the county. And once these issues are resolved, we expect to see the reductions accelerate. So this slide just shows you the aims that we have now as a council within each of those key themes. So within buildings, we have a 55% reduction in emission target for 2030, and in mobility and transport, 55% reduction in emissions. In procurement, to influence change in decarbonised and sustainable procurement, and then in land use, to increase carbon absorption and maintain biodiversity. And then the overarching behaviour theme, the aim is for climate change to be considered in all decision making, and members and employees are trained and aware of their responsibilities. The next notable amendment is carbon reduction potentials, financial forecasts, co-benefits and constraints that are associated with carbon actions where possible. So we've done quite a lot of work here to consider the constraints and interdependencies that will affect the Council's ability to decarbonise each theme area. Within each of the key themes, we've included this section around constraints and interdependencies. And the example that I've shown on screen here is within the procurement theme. These are the these are the areas that are beyond the council's control, but affect our ability to meet net zero carbon by 2030. So within procurement, there's the availability of the supply chain to deliver with reduced carbon impacts. There's a lack of a mature supply chain in green skill areas. There's a lack of knowledge and understanding of carbon impacts within supply chain, the lack of national policy and framework to support decarbonisation within the private sector, and the ability to not exclude small to medium enterprises or local suppliers. So these are all things that are largely out of our control. And if we have positive change within these factors from external sources, this will help us to accelerate our net zero carbon by 2030 aim. Without these measures having changed, this is what prevents us from being able to achieve what we set out to. Within the revised action plan, then we've added some additional columns. So the first one is on CO2 saving or CO2 equivalent saving. We've tried to calculate the well, an estimation of what we think the carbon could be saved from carrying out each of the actions. So you can see there from CCBE2, which is to review and rationalise building assets and leases. We've set an estimation there of 437.3 tonnes, and that one is simply from the county hall closure. So further rationalisation could see further savings in CO2 from that action. The second column then is on cost. So we have included sort of high level estimations of costs for these actions, either through feasibility studies we've had carried out or business cases that we've started developing for these pieces of work. These are largely within the buildings and mobility and transport theme as their tangible physical change, obviously within things like behaviour and procurement, it's difficult to be able to cost what actions are, but we've tried to include costs where we can. Then we've also included a column on co-benefits. The feedback that we received through both internal and external engagement was how and why is climate change, climate action important, and how does it affect me? So we asked the public what factors were most important to them, and similar themes of health, jobs, fuel poverty, green space emerged from this activity. So we felt it was important to reflect these co-benefits that occur as a result of taking climate action. And it also helps us to link climate actions with other priorities and commitments across the council. We've got the section also on the wider county of Flintshire. So this also came out of the public engagement that they wanted to see what the council was doing in terms of reducing carbon and influencing those within the wider county of Flintshire. So we have actions around reducing energy consumption emissions from homes and businesses, reducing emissions from transport by promoting sustainable transport, supporting other landowners and the community to utilise green spaces, supporting council services, residents and businesses to adapt to the impacts of climate change, and then engaging with the Public Services Board to shape the regional climate risk assessment and action plan. So these are largely, hold on a second. These are, why is that doing that? Hold on. My Teams isn't playing. These are largely actions that are already included within other portfolios, work plans, and commitments that we've made within other strategies across the council. So we're really linking the work that we're committing to within the climate change strategy with other work programmes across the council. The last notable amendment then is a new section which is on climate risk and resilience. And this gives an overview of risks that are associated with a changing climate. So we already know that the climate is changing. We're already seeing the impact of severe weather on the county and wider. So what are we doing to make sure that our services aren't impacted by those changes? The section that we've included is very light touch. It gives an overview of climate risk and some of the high level actions that we're taking as a council. But there is a wider piece of work over 2025, which we're carrying out with the Public Service Board, and that's looking at a regional climate risk assessment. So a lot of the climate risks aren't unique to Flintshire. They're things that are going to get experienced across the region. So we're taking a regional approach, which I think is really positive, and allows for collaboration because there are many stakeholders that need to engage with this process. It's not something that the council can complete in a silo. So those are the notable amendments, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for that report. Okay, members, any questions for Alex? Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, it's just a clarification. I've asked you this question before. I think that the other members need to hear the answer as well. Where net zero is actual emissions minus sequestration. So we achieve net zero when both are equal, emissions and sequestration. So can you tell us what the sequestration level is, please, in tonnage per year? Thank you.
Yeah, so an estimation of what our land currently sequesters is around 1,600 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent. So with a carbon footprint of around 30,000, 1,600 doesn't make a huge impact, but it does mean that to reach net zero carbon, we just need to reduce our carbon emissions down to either 1,600 tonnes or increase our carbon sequestration so that it helps to balance.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I suppose it begs a question, basically, for people who aren't fully au fait with the climate changes, and members of the public would probably ask this question: how do you actually measure the greenhouse gas emissions? You know, if you've got a gas meter, you can measure the gas coming in, but how do you actually measure greenhouse gas emissions, and also calculate the weight? You know, you say there's so many tons being saved. How does all that work? You also said that compliance with the net zero targets is subject to adequate funding, and that always seems to be the case with public bodies. So what funding, how much funding do we actually need, and what is it going to be used for, notwithstanding the £18 million that was in one of your slides for the expenditure on energy efficiency in buildings? And I assume that if you don't get the funds, we don't achieve the net zero target. And finally, on one of your slides, it tells us what we're actually going to do, but it would have been useful on the slide to say how we're going to do it. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Alex.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. In terms of how we measure greenhouse gas emissions, we know what we know what sources cause carbon emissions. Apologies, because I'm trying to simplify. So what the greenhouse gas emission protocol, which is an internationally used method, it applies a carbon emission factor to each of those different types of source. So, for example, we know that burning fossil fuels puts carbon into the atmosphere. So each of those fossil fuels will have its own emission factor associated with it. So taking, so you've got gas heating in your house. We know how much gas you're going to use in a year. So we take that figure of gas that you've used in the year and we multiply that by what's been allocated to gas. And that gives us a weight of carbon that's been produced by that gas that's been burnt over that year. So each of those sources of carbon emission have their own emission factor, which have been calculated through the greenhouse gas protocol. And that's how we then end up with a tonnage or kilograms of carbon. And it's all obviously an estimate, and it all changes depending on where gas is sourced from and how much renewable energy has been put into the national grid. That affects the change in emission factors, and also changes in the economy. So as we saw in supply chain, there was a significant change in emission factors, and that was because there was a change seen in the economy that was more towards a greener way of working. So that reduced some of the emission factors in some of those supply chain areas. So I hope that answers that part of it without trying to complicate too much.
It's not an exact science, is it? It's a bit.
No, it never is an exact science. Yeah. In terms of funding needed, as mentioned, we have tried to give high-level costings for some of those works in the action plan. Appendix 5 is a report that was presented to Climate Change Committee around financing of climate action, and that actually gives a really good overview of the types of funding that we've used both internally and externally, largely externally, and for climate action over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and also gives an indication of different types of finance that we can use moving forwards. And there are really good case studies of innovative income sources that different councils have used that we need to investigate further. So please have a look at that appendix, and if there's anything that you want further detail on, I'm happy to pick that up offline. You're right, if there is no funding, it is a huge risk, and that is in the corporate risk register. If we're not able to source the funding to carry out these activities, then we can't do them, and that's the same with any strategy across the council, and we have to be realistic in terms of what we can achieve. But hopefully there's some sort of assurance from that report, the Appendix 5, that demonstrates that we're always seeking external funding opportunities, and we've been really successful in doing that in the past. And we're also taking a collaborative approach with other councils across the region and across the border, because we're all trying to achieve the same thing. So we have confidence that there is finance available to carry out these activities, and we just have to be really prepared for when the funding becomes available, because it does tend to come quite late in the year and has to be spent by the end of March, which is always a bit annoying. So having some kind of off-the-shelf projects ready, so that when the funding comes in, we can get that in and hopefully get it secured. But yeah, it's always a risk, and that is identified in the corporate risk register. I hope that answers your questions.
Yeah, can I just come back on one point, please, Chair?
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, as I suspected, then you've confirmed that if we don't get the funding, we are at risk of not achieving net zero by 2030. If that is the case, would it be similar to the waste strategy where Welsh Government could impose fines on the authority for not achieving net zero because the funding wasn't available?
Penalisation is not something that's been discussed previously. And the net zero carbon by 2030 aim is for the whole of the public sector. So we have to demonstrate that we've contributed as part of the public sector towards that net zero carbon. And I think the work that we've done, 30% reduction since our baseline year is really positive, and we need to actually, applaud ourselves for that, because it's been very challenging times. So I think I haven't heard of anything around those lines, and I know that all of the councils are in a very similar position, but we're all making progress towards that goal collectively, and I think that's what Welsh Government will be looking at. But obviously, it's something we need to keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor Rose.
Thanks. Thanks, Alex, who let me attend one of the informal briefings with Climate Change Committee on this, which is interesting. From that, one of the questions would be, do we split out the emissions by portfolio and department to make certain we can prioritize which departments require more investment? Obviously, there is a difference between each department, as in some will have more emissions than others that are just unavoidable and things, and some will have access to more ability to sequester on behalf of the whole council, etc. But do we split it out by those things so we know which areas have more need to reduce? And then the second that is with the time scales. So within the action plan, there is no time scales really written down as an indication. Is there an additional plan in the background? Obviously, there's lots of lines there which need more research. Is there a priority list in order of what ones are being researched and how they're being researched? And some of the options that we've got, is there a timeline plan of when those options are going to come into fruition in terms of each of those things? And then finally, there was reports last year that sequestration on a global basis is slowing down due to stress of the already changing environment. Obviously, they're preliminary findings. If we are putting all our eggs in sequestration basket and that reduces, is there any other options we've got on the table, or are we possibly going down a route that may not end up sequestering as much as we're initially planning for now? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. On your first question, we don't currently split emissions by portfolio, but it is something that we're looking to do because I think it will really help the portfolios to understand what their contribution towards that carbon footprint is. At the moment, there's a bit of a disparity, I think, seeing it as a sort of whole entity as a council, whereas where they can understand where their activities within their portfolio are contributing, I think that will really help to change attitudes and behaviours. So it is something that we're looking to implement. In terms of the action plan timescales, yes, there is a more detailed plan that sits beneath this, and each of the themes within the strategy have an officer working group, and they manage and oversee that more detailed action plan. So there are timescales, risk associated, resource requirements, etc., which haven't been obviously included in this high-level action plan. In terms of sequestration, we don't have all of our eggs in that basket. We can't have all of our eggs in that basket. Our aim isn't to sequester all of the carbon that we can't reduce, because there isn't enough land to be able to do that. For starters, our aim is to reduce our emissions as much as we possibly can that's within the council's control, and at the same time be clever with the land that we have, to not only improve carbon sequestration but also to improve biodiversity, to look at natural flood mitigation. There's a broader sort of theme of how we can use our land, and that might be in line with renewable energy generation, mixing sort of agrivoltaics, so we have sheep grazing at the same time as renewable energy generation. It's really being a little bit more intelligent about how we use our land, and if we're able to increase our carbon sequestration at the same time, then it's a win-win. But no, our eggs certainly aren't all in that basket, and we are kind of anticipating that NRW have obviously got a lot of land and they can help to offset some of the emissions that will come from the rest of the public sector.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coggins-Cogan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Alex for the presentation report. On page 93 of the report, which I think is in the part that's the Cabinet report or the Climate Change Committee report, I noticed there were some comparisons with other councils on what they're doing. The one that sort of struck me was the workplace parking levy. Is that something that's within, I mean, I assume it is because that's what is in there, but can you just confirm that that's within the competency of Flintshire County Council to pursue if we wanted to? And also the community bonds, which I think are in page 94,114. So we could, if that's within our competency, issue community bonds to help us achieve our net zero targets. Just because I am concerned, I think as Councillor Rose and Councillor Pearce have said, that we have the ambition, but it's so dependent on the funding, which is it's a critical risk to the authority. Yes, if you could just expand on those. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Yeah, these are both examples of options that other local authorities have successfully put into place to help to generate income to support climate action. They're both elements that we need to do further investigation on to see if they are suitable for us. It might be that actually, you know, the processes that we have in place don't support that. The workplace parking levy, I know, is under review at the moment anyway, so that'll be part of that options appraisal, hopefully, to consider. But in terms of whether any of these options are taken forward, there's more work that we need to do to investigate them fully, understand you know, the pros and cons from those case study local authorities who've driven them forwards, and then really assess whether they would be suitable for the council or not.
Thank you, Alex. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Marshall, I know you have an interest in this subject, so I'll allow you to come back in again.
I do. Thank you very much. As Alex said there, they're not making any more land, but there are vertical farming techniques where they use existing buildings and have multiple layers, which increases the area. I know it's inside a building, but you could put solar panels and LED lighting. So anything that captures carbon out of the air using photosynthesis is what we're looking for to increase that. Warmth could be provided by geothermal energy, heating the place up, light from the outside, water, carbon dioxide, and you've got an increase in sequestration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Marshall. Okay, if there's no further speakers or nobody requesting any questions, I'll move to the recommendations on the bottom of page 17. There's two recommendations there. The progress made in delivering carbon reduction measures to date is acknowledged, and that the climate change strategy and its aims therein be endorsed. Can I have a mover?
I'll move.
Okay, I can see somebody moving. Let's go have a second there.
Second.
Seconded, and have a show of hands, those in favour. Okay, that looks to be unanimously carried. Thank you very much, and thank you, Alex, for that presentation. Okay, we'll move on to agenda item 6. The chunky part of the report, as it was. The placemaking plans for Holywell and Shotton. If I can start with Andrew.
Yes, thanks, Jess. This one follows on from February's report which Niall and Karen presented, which introduced the concept of placemaking plans, what they're about, why we need them. And at that point, they talked about the plans which will be coming through the process, and we'll bring them to this committee and cabinet thereafter when they're in a state of readiness. And the first two are on the agenda today. That's Holywell and Shotton. So I'll hand over to Niall, and then Karen will bring you the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Yeah, just a few moments of introduction, then I'll hand over to Karen. Firstly, really just a reminder of why this is important. Town centres across the county are key hubs for employment, hosting very large numbers of small businesses. They are a vital shop window when people are thinking about investing in the county. The condition, the appearance of our town centres is critically important to those decisions. They are a hub for local services, and if you look at some of the information presented on Holywell and on Shotton, you'll see the strength of local service provision within those town centres. They represent a really critical space for social interaction in towns. They're a place where people can go and meet others, but also fundamentally the physical environment has a major impact on the quality of life of residents. So an attractive and pleasant town centre will boost people's quality of life, and one which is the opposite will detract from their quality of life. And so the work that we do in the towns is absolutely critical to people. As Andy mentioned, the report builds on the report you had last month, which set out the overall process, just a reminder of how the placemaking journey is running. These are the first 2 of 7 placemaking plans, and Karen will talk you through the work in Holywell and Shotton, and we'll take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Niall. Good morning, members. So building on the meeting last month and the report to give that overview of work completed to date across the 7 plans. And just to recap, really, section 105 of the report spells out the 8-stage process that we've gone through for this placemaking plan development for all 7 towns, all at various stages to date. So the first 2, as Niall and Andy have already said, are for Holywell and Shotton. They're concluded, and I think the first thing, really, hopefully, that does come out of the report and to state at this point is the amount of interest that it's generated, I think, within the public. The consultation and engagement has seen considerable numbers of people, both at first stage, telling us what they really, think about their town, how they use their town, how they perceive it, some of the issues that they have with the town, what they like about the town equally. I think it's easy sometimes to focus on the negatives, but there are, some key basic positives as well around each of the towns that we're working in, and that's really, really important to remember as well as a starting off point for the development of the plans. So in terms of Holywell and Shotton, the first 2 plans, again, as they all are fully informed by a range of data sets. Over 100 data sets have been reviewed as part of the early stages of the 8-stage process. And the consultation has been informed in the case of Holywell by 1,622 people in total, excluding the officers within the council and our partner organisations. That's just the public response, and also 2,030 for Shotton comparatively. So, over 3,600 people just on these 2 plans have had their say, and their views and comments have fed into the content at various stages. Members have also been consulted as of town councils, and some really productive meetings, particularly with the town councils as well, once the plans were developed. And again, they've informed the content that we're bringing to Cabinet next week. So in terms of the priorities, there are 10 and 9 respectively for Holywell and Shotton. They're outlined in pages 68 to 87 for Holywell and pages 72 to 87 of the appendices 1 and 2 that were attached to the report. Our reminder of this, really, it's a focus for a long-term plan. So there isn't an expectation that people could read these plans at this current stage and see the specific action that will lead to these. These are broad, holistic plans that Welsh Government have set as a requirement, and they are a condition to future regeneration funding as well, which I know we touched on in last month's meeting. But it's even more important, therefore, that we get the priorities right and that they reflect the needs of local people. And generally, the feedback that we've had at certainly the last stage of consultation is that it's been very positive. People, again, are very, very much well engaged in that process, and they do feel that the plans both reflect the needs of the area. There aren't any shortcomings that have been identified from the processes we've undertaken in terms of things that are missing. That's one of the key questions that we've asked. But also the approach that we propose to take in setting a 1 to 2 year action plan to ensure that the plans both match the resource available, but also are realistic in terms of our resources, the funding available, but it's also a way of management of expectations. They are hopefully ambitious enough to set that long 10-year action and vision, but they're not detailed at that point because we need to look year on year at what we have available to us as a range of stakeholders. And it is a plan that's different, I think, to previous master plans or regeneration strategies, in that they are very well informed by the public. There's a lot of data and public that have public comments, feedback, but the fact that they are to be taken forward by multiple stakeholders and organisations, I think, is what sets these plans apart from what we've had previously, where they are owned effectively by one part of an organisation who is reliant on securing funding to make them happen. I suppose in the context of North Wales, the funding is relatively limited still, so I think managing expectations is really important. Just in terms of context, the annual budget for Welsh Government regeneration investment is around £89 million per annum, and that's for the whole of North Wales towns. So, we are able to look at, of course, other sources, but you know, it's about using these plans to work out what the priorities are. Obviously, you know, there is a challenge in terms of everything being funded, particularly in our case for 7 towns across the county. In terms of next steps then, obviously Cabinet are expected to review and hopefully approve next week. And then beyond that, we'll move into the phase of action plan development. And we've been asking at consultation stage how local and community level organisations can be involved in that process, as it's really important that, having fed so much into the content and the design, you know, of the priorities, that is a key component of the next steps. And so we're proposing to use the vehicle we've used for the governance of the placemaking plans to date, the People's Group and Places Group, but with an element of wider engagement to those groups to involve the public. That concludes the kind of process we've gone through, the 2 first plans that we've completed. The level of engagement, I think particularly via the online platform, Give My View, as I've mentioned, that's been very considerable. And just, I suppose, to add, the Welsh Government officials that we're working with, but also the Design Commission for Wales, who were set a task of being our critical friend as local authorities during the process of developing these plans. They've also been involved and given us really, really positive feedback, and we've actually been used as a showcase example as to how we've done things in Flintshire to help others inform how they go about their placemaking plans across Wales. So some real positives, I think, from the process, and also some lessons learned to take us forward into the further 5 to be completed and to come through the same process. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen. Councillor Bibby.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much to Niall and Karen for the reports. Has been very constructive working with both of you over this process, and I think, you know, it's very impressive to see that we've had in Shotton 2,000, well over 2,000 responses from the members of the public. So I think there's been an enormous amount of engagement. I probably want to comment on Shotton because I couldn't really pass comments on Holywell. I think that's best left for Holywell members. But I think one of the first challenges that we've got, I think, in Shotton and the Deeside area particularly, is in comparison to maybe Flint, Mold and Holywell, which developed quite organically and gradually as market towns. The Deeside strip sprung up almost overnight in the 1890s, whilst there was some sort of shipbuilding industry in Connors Quay. It's never been a sort of central hub. It's a linear development along the coast road. I think if anyone's ever read the playwright Emlyn Williams, who moved from a rural area of the county to the Deeside area as a child for his parents to work in their steelworks, he compared it to being like a Wild West frontier town at the turn of the century. So it's developed very differently to many other of the towns in the county. I think Karen made a very good point about being realistic and managing expectations. I think, you know, the face of the high street has changed totally in the past few decades compared to what it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s. That's been driven by a lot of social changes and consumer behaviour. So I think we need to be realistic with residents who, I think, look back to maybe the glory days of when you had a high street where you had the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. I think we need to sort of be realistic and grounded of what's achievable in the 21st century. I think it's good to highlight some positives that have been happening. We've had some very good positive developments, particularly in securing strategic, I can't remember, strategic places funding, was it? And transforming
towns, placemaking grant, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, we've already seen that a number of shop units with match funding with the landlord and developers. So we've seen a lot of visual improvements because some of the properties were in quite poor condition. And again, bringing back the first floor accommodation, that's then to assist with meeting housing need in the community. it's quite positive to see that Shotton's vacancy rate's just below the national average. And also the fact that we've got 2 banks. And I know that's been, particularly with Buckley, Holywell and Flint that have seen bank closures, the fact that Buckley doesn't have a bank, I think that's one positive. I think we have recently had the closure of NatWest, but the relocation of the post office branch in there is mitigating that. There's a lot of very positive and exciting things happening at Rivertown Church and the development of the community hub. And I know that's been successful in achieving quite a lot of funding. I think there's been a lot of partner organisations that are driving that forward. The positivity of the transport links, which I think is a double-edged sword. It means people can get in very quickly, but they can also get out. And I think that's one challenge where you've got a very extensive retail offer in Chester and the convenience of getting there. I think that's one sort of thing that's obviously quite a big challenge. In terms of our steelworking heritage, I think we need to be making a lot more about the history and the heritage. I know from a lot of other communities within Wales, I know in a lot of some of the mining towns down the South Wales valleys, they use a lot of sort of draw with the coal industry. And, I'm just wondering, the possibility if we can look at accessing some sort of grant funding, maybe to use more murals or things like that to sort of emphasise that steelworking heritage. Just to meet some of the negatives, I think one problem we've got is obviously the quite limited retail offer. Whilst we've got a lot of high street brands there, I think a lot of the independent side, it comes from the report, we see hairdressers, vape shops, a lot of businesses that I think there's a lot of. That's not to be disparaging of hairdressers because everyone needs the haircut, but it does show that the resilience on the high street is where services you can't access online. I think just one of the other problems, and I think that's just a big challenge everywhere, is I think general maintenance. I think with the resources that street scene's got, I think it just feels like a never-ending task of dealing with the litter, the fly tipping, the dog fouling, which I think is a big thing that brings people down a lot. I think it's, we just don't seem to have the resource to be as reactive as maybe we want to be. And I think just, the ongoing risk is that obviously we are quite dependent on external funding, which, as you mentioned, is quite limited. So, we are dependent on grant and capital externally rather than what we can provide internally within the council. So I think, obviously there's a lot of ambition here, but just making sure we keep focus and be able to get the money in places, I think is the big challenge we've got now.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bibby. Councillor Pearce.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just applaud the level of detail in the plans? I think it's a credit to whoever's put that together. The level of detail is absolutely tremendous. So well done on that. Just want to come back to Councillor Bibby, made some interesting points. We are getting banking facilities in Buckley soon. It's been announced that Principality is going to move into the Connect Centre. And regarding getting out of Shotton quickly on the train to Chester, Councillor Bibby, some friends and I went on the train from Shotton to Chester. Eventually, when a train actually stopped in Shotton that we could get on, and when we got on it, it was absolutely jam full. So we haven't been on that particular route since, but maybe that was a one-off. I don't know, but yeah, right. 115, section 115. Now, yeah, the plans are very ambitious. It'll all require funding. But I think when most people come to Shotton from Queensferry, the first thing that hits them is the congestion. Yeah. And in 115, it says changes to Chester Road are required to encourage people to stay. So my question is Chester Road being changed in any significant way so that it doesn't discourage people to visit the area? In 116, it says that you're making the high street feel less dominated by vehicles. Well, the fact is, it is dominated by vehicles because it's very much like Buckley before we put the pedestrianised area in where the road went straight through the town centre. So, yeah, the plans are very detailed, but could you explain how the congestion is going to be dealt with? Again, I pick up on Councillor Bibby. Price's Butchers had an excellent reputation in Shotton, and on occasions I'd go and get stuff for the in-laws, but unfortunately that as a private function that is now closed down, which is regrettable. But you know, one store doesn't make town, you would hope. But I think that the main issue for me is you know, how are you going to deal with the congestion and to bring people in, because that's what needs to happen. And I would you know, applaud any actions, and I think that Holywell and Shotton have got exciting plans, as Buckley has. There's a consultation going on in Buckley at the moment. But in 201, I think it sums it up that the funding does not guarantee full implementation of any of the plans, but the plans do show what can be achieved. So is it too early to say at this stage what percentage of the plan might be implemented due to funding? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Karen or Niall, do you want to come back on that?
May I come in, Chair, to start with, and Karen can fill in any gaps. Councillor Pearce is absolutely right. I think one of the biggest issues facing Shotton is the street environment, which is, as the report highlights, is very, very heavily dominated by the road, which makes it a very tiring and unappealing environment for anyone to spend any time in, sadly. That's not going to change overnight. The traffic is predominantly, I understand, you know, making its way through Deeside from one end to the other. It's not through traffic mostly, I believe. It's local traffic, but that's not going to change overnight. What the report highlights are there are options to try and mitigate that. We can't reduce that, but there are options, A, to make it easier for pedestrians to navigate that environment, not least perhaps reduce the number of barriers that stop them actually crossing the road. But also you know, measures like increased greenery that just soften the environment, reduce the noise, try to mitigate where we can the harshness of that environment, basically. We cannot change the fundamental flow of traffic. That is regrettably what it is. Hopefully, at least with the 20-mile-an-hour zone, it is now slower traffic as well, so it makes it a little bit quieter and a little bit easier for pedestrians to cross. But fundamentally, that remains the issue. And I'll perhaps hand over to Karen in terms of the query about the funding.
Yes, so in terms of the funding itself, this isn't a costed plan. It's not a timetable of a menu of projects that, you know, various organisations with certain resources, dates and times have got at a cost. The 1 to 2 year plan that I mentioned will actually look to address what can be done within the first 2 years, and at that point we'll be able to identify, you know, ballpark the nature of the funding that's required to implement those early identified, dare I say, quick wins, but earlier projects that can come forwards. And they can range from small revenue projects that really can make a difference to how people feel, because obviously, as it's already been commented, you know, there is that feeling of this is what the place was, and this is, you know, now what we feel about the place from our residents. Particularly, it's in the report, sense of sort of grieving of what the place was, perhaps in its heyday, associated to the manufacturing industry and the decline since. So some projects, you know, inevitably will be focused on people, the heritage, the culture, celebrating that, and other projects could be around, you know, larger investment or capital investment effectively, and that could involve greening. The consultants that work with us to develop the plans are placemaking experts in their own right, and one of the urban designers on the team has mentioned things like even, you know, the removal of the railings through the town, and also the treatment to the road surface. You know, maybe a different treatment in the junction area, so it really is apparent to the user, as well as that softer element with the greening, that it feels different, and when people see a place that looks and feels different, then they tend to modify their behaviour and use that place differently. So they're the kind of actions that we'll be looking to include in the action plan. But as of, you know, to be short and sweet in response to your question, we don't have an indication as to what the value of projects is currently. We will look to do that in increments of 1 to 2 years, and that will be reflective of what's available. What can we look to attract in terms of funds available? So it will be what we'd like to do, what we can do in terms of available resource, but also what we're able to do with the funding that's out there for us to attract and to bring into Flintshire, into our towns.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Dolphin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not actually on the committee, but perhaps I can talk a little bit to Holywell, as there's no Holywell representation on the committee. And firstly, of course, thanks to Karen and her team and Niall, a tremendous amount of work. Councillor Pearce mentioned the detail that's gone into. So this is just 2 of the plans. There's 5 more to come, and Buckley will be next. So it's exciting for the towns. I mean, a lot of people say, and I've heard it said, oh, not more plans. But of course, we need these plans. And if you look at 102, there's one of the big reasons for it. You won't get the grants without this placemaking plan. And Karen's explained why these plans are different and why they're important. So we have to have a realistic ambition as well. That's a bit like climate change. We have to have a realistic ambition with what money may be available to implement these plans as much as we can. But we've got the right team in place to do that. So that's really good for us as a council and for the towns involved. Holywell Industrial Heritage. The plan itself talks about getting more greenery back into the town and links to the Greenfield Valley and the coast. And we're dealing with what's here now in these plans, and in the future there may be other things that the town can link into, such as the coastal park down along the whole of the Flintshire coast, but in the Greenfield dock area. And Holywell is very good at putting on events. That's one thing that the town should be praised for. They do great events and they're well supported. The market needs a big push this year, particularly as it's moved location and the high street is going to be open adjacent to it. So that's something perhaps we might, because it's my local town. I'm not the Holywell Town Council, but I live in Carmel, which is a big area. There's a lot of all people go into Holywell from Carmel and the surrounding villages, Holkin, Brinford. So it encompasses a lot of local villages to come into it. We're not talking about trains. Train stations will be another hot topic, no doubt, as election times come up next year. But we're talking about what's here and now, the train station. We've been talking about it for a generation. We may talk about it for another generation, but it's something that may be positive. Shotton's got that train station, so that's really important for a successful town, I think, particularly going forwards with travel. So we're dealing with what's here and now. These plans are very important. They've been presented really well, I think, and let's hope and trust that we will get our fair share of money to produce what's required for all the local towns in Flintshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dolphin. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. I just heard a little bit about the train arrangements at Shotton. I commuted for 27 years from home to London, and it was in the last 3 years I found out the most effective route was to go from Pennyford station to Shotton, then to Flint, and then catch the West Coast Main Line, because there's more train stop at Flint than in Shotton. And also North Wales, the cheaper ticket, off-peak tickets are available an hour and a half, I think, earlier in Flint than they are in Chester. So anybody wanting to save money, go to Flint first and then to London. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Marshall. Okay, no further speakers. I'll just add my tuppence into that to on the Shotton element is that has been mentioned, congestion, and obviously Queen's Ferry is a plan to come, But over the last weeks, it's been really noticeable that that congestion going from Conisky through to Queensferry, it used to sort of tail back from Queensferry Asda Lights to sort of Charlie's or Shotton Lane. Now it tails back through the whole town through to Conisky. So as part of Queensferry's plan, which is yet to come, there needs to be something, that bottleneck that is the Queensferry dual carriageway roundabout Asda Lights, that is a big turn off for a lot of people, and that's also the reason why a lot of people speed and take shortcuts through the higher Shotton estate to try and avoid it. But of course, what that does is it means that the junctions coming out onto the bottom road are forever congested with people trying to get onto the main road. So the road is a big factor, and obviously that's something that until we deal with that, then I think a lot of the other things will be nice and around the periphery, but we need to look at the big issues. With regard to buses, which we'll be talking later, and we were talking about timetables for buses and making them better for people to get to work and this, that and the other. You can actually get on in Shotton High Street and take 10 minutes of your journey, get into Queensferry, and then you could take another 20 minutes to get to Chester. So you're taking 10 minutes to go basically 1 mile. So that really needs to be dealt with. So hopefully when we're looking at all these things, big money can be made available for that, which would be a big difference to Shotton. So that was just me having my little moan. But I welcome the report and I welcome the plan, and we, as said by another member, we need it to go forward. So thank you very much for that. Katie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just in response to your comments, Chair, obviously just remind all members that the Regional Transport Plan draft is currently live, out for consultation. The deadline's 14th of April, so any improvements to the road network, to bus services, to resolve things like congestion, need to feed through the Regional Transport Plan, because that will be a CJC decision going forward in terms of how funding is allocated across North Wales. So I'd strongly encourage all members to have input into that process, because that's where we're going to get any funding in the future.
All right, thank you very much for that, Katie. Okay, no further speakers, so I'll move to the recommendations on page 97. To note the progress with the plans for Shotton and Holywell, support the draft placemaking plans for Holywell and Shotton, and support the coordination, development and implementation of action plans for Holywell and Shotton. Can I have a mover? Moved, seconded? Seconded, and can I have a show of hands, all those in favour? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 7, bus services for Flintshire. Can I bring in the Chief Officer?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. I'll introduce Anthony Stamford, who's the Transport Service Manager, and Helen Telford, who's the Integrated Transport Unit Manager. Helen and Anthony are going to take you through the main body of the report, but I'll quickly introduce it before I hand over to them. This report was a report that was requested by members on the Scrutiny Committee some time ago, so it's been on the forward work plan for a few months. Specifically, it related to issues, and you touched upon it in the last agenda item, around the reliability and punctuality of bus services. And then I think members wanted to better understand the core bus network and have an update on that, how bus services are organised, as the funding mechanisms and how bus services are operated is quite complex. So Helen will take you through that to explain that, but also how there is ongoing work across Wales, both regionally and nationally, to improve bus services across Wales. So we'll outline some of the proposals that are coming forward in terms of bus reform, and all of this, as I just mentioned previously, is linked to the Regional Transport Plan, which is currently out for consultation at the moment, and also the established Llwybr Newydd Wales Transport Strategy. So I'll hand over to Helen at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Katie. So as Katie mentioned, this is an informative report on bus services in Flintshire. So the report has been requested following concerns raised by members on the punctuality of bus services in Flintshire. And as Katie mentioned, the report outlines overarching plans and strategies for bus reform. So the legal duties, the council has no mandatory obligation to fund public transport. However, it does have powers to enter into agreements with transport operators to provide services that would not normally be commercially viable. So this would be journeys such as early mornings, evenings, weekends, and rural services that would support national, regional, and corporate objectives around the environment, employment, education, health, and supporting the economy. So the council has just over £2.5 million available to support bus services, which is formed by Flintshire's own discretionary revenue budget, the Bus Service Support Grant, and the Bus Network Grant. So Cabinet approval was given in 2016 to establish a core network of bus routes. These routes link main hubs with direct bus services, and the core network is made up of a variety of different services, including commercial bus services. These are operated by bus companies and they are commercially viable as the running costs are covered by the fares and concessionary fares taken. Subsidised services are socially necessary bus services. Much of the network operates in rural areas, and local bus routes tend to be a hybrid services, so where certain times can run commercially and lower usage times are subsidised by de minimis payment. There are Traws Cymru routes. We've got the T8 in Flintshire. This offers longer distance direct services with fewer diversions. These link with rail and other local bus services. In Flintshire, we have the Flexi buses in Holywell and Buckley. They are demand responsive and operate in rural communities and can be used to access services on the core network or to access Traws Cymru services for onward travel. We have grant funded services. So the Bus Network Grant has been awarded to local authorities to procure previously commercial services that have suffered following the pandemic. So in Appendix 2, all the services in Flintshire are listed and how they are operated. So obviously the issue around punctuality has been raised, and in recent years operators have reported various challenges in operating reliable services. These challenges include road work schemes along the extent of bus routes, on-street parking, motorists ignoring legal parking restrictions, which can have a negative effect on bus journey times, and the need for bus priority measures, and along with a number of other minor sources of delay. So Transport for Wales have commissioned Arup to complete a review of bus infrastructure across North Wales. The study has identified interventions that local authorities can consider. Arup have taken a data-led approach to identify a long list of interventions to improve punctuality. The council can use prioritisation methods that have been devised to consider schemes based on the impact of the bus system, contributions to wellbeing goals and affordability. So a map of these schemes can be found at Appendix 3. So the role of the Traffic Commissioner. So punctual and reliable bus services are critical to people's choice of travel. Passengers should be able to rely on buses arriving at predictable times, and irregular or inconsistent service can lead to passenger dissatisfaction. The Traffic Commissioner is responsible for licensing and for the licensing and regulation of buses, along with the registration of local bus services. The role of the Traffic Commissioner is to monitor bus services to ensure they follow statutory guidance, such as ensuring bus services remain within a window of tolerance for arriving at scheduled timing and destination points. The Traffic Commissioner has powers to impose penalties for non-compliance as outlined in this report. However, penalties generally only arise when the operator is found to be non-compliant without reasonable excuse. Cooperation with local authorities to address traffic-related issues is expected, and operators should communicate effectively with passengers where regarding delays and changes to services. So there are a number of overarching national and regional strategies in place or are being developed, which will have the potential to improve bus services and enhance active travel for residents in Flintshire in the future, including the Wales Transport Strategy, which aims to encourage people to use more sustainable modes of travel. The Regional Transport Plan outlines the long-term vision for the region's transport. The plan includes goals and priorities for improving bus reliability and punctuality, and it outlines the proposals for bus franchising. As Katie mentioned, the plan is currently out for consultation, and further details of this can be found in section 3 of this report. Bus reform is the Welsh Government and Transport for Wales vision for an integrated transport network of one network, one timetable and one ticket. There is a link in this report as well for further information. Another opportunity is the investment zone. One of the key components of the investment zone is transport, and in partnership with Transport for Wales, projects will be delivered to enhance access to key sites and support bus services, active travel and strategic transport improvements. An indicative figure of around 87 million is allocated for local infrastructure, including innovation and transport. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Okay, if I can open it up to members. Any members who wish to ask a question of Helen, Anthony or Katie? Mike? Councillor Pearce?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing the report. I'm a regular bus user, and Helen will know I've contacted her on several occasions, particularly the number 4 service, where it is delayed time and time again, and cancellations. Doesn't mention anything about the Ariba app in the report, but the Ariba app is useful at times. I'll give you an example. 28th of February, I wanted to get the bus to Chester in the afternoon. The Ariba app told me that it will be leaving at 13:54 after a 10-minute delay. So off we go to the bus stop. We get to the bus stop, that bus is no longer there, it's disappeared. The next bus is about 40 minutes time. So I think if we could note that Ariba need taking to task over their apps, and that needs improving. So buses are an essential part of life, as just been mentioned now. The Wales Transport Strategy and the Regional Transport Plan. Yes, they're all good words, and you can take part in all the consultation. But as we've seen, if the funding isn't there, we don't get the buses. But we saw what happened in the budget, where we managed to claw back over £400,000 subsidy. But it seems to run when we can get bits of money from here, there and everywhere. I think the county council should set its stall out and say, look, we are going to have it as a core function, as much as education, social health, bus services. So I think we've got to start looking at how we're going to fund that. We need a bus service that's fit and proper. And I note from what Helen says, the council has no mandatory obligation to fund any public transport services. Well, it would be a poor county if we just relied on that and didn't do it, but we do it, and I'm pleased to see. But we need a fit for purpose service. On page 302, it talks about the Flintshire core bus network. But I think that this is right for review, and I'd make that as a proposal, Chair, in one of the recommendations, that we need to review the core bus network. If you look at the map on page 309, you will see between Buckley and Broughton we have Dobshill. I don't believe any buses go through Dobshill. The core network from Buckley to Broughton is through Wood Lane, St David's Park, and Harden. Harden isn't even on the map, and yet I know at least 3 buses that go through Harden: the number 4, the 4X, and the number 11. So this is out of date. It needs amending. So I would make that. I'll put that forward, Chair, as a recommendation that we look at that. It's been mentioned about subsidies, the subsidised bus services. It has been mentioned. I heard a cabinet member mention perhaps we need our own bus company. Now I know Chester did for many years, the corporation, the Maroon Corporation buses, but they went by the wayside. I would assume again it's down to funding, but at least we have to look at all the options. The flexi service, section E on page 303, it has been mentioned by myself and others, the amount of time the flexi service does appear to be parked up in obscure places. Perhaps it's waiting for passengers, I don't know. But I think it would be useful to look at what the demand is and what the running costs per passenger is compared to subsidies that we give to other bus companies that run a commercial service. It's something that's useful, but I think we need to look at the costings of it. Now, Helen mentioned in her comments about explaining the problems of punctuality and reliability, and one of them in the bullet point in 106 is on-street parking. Now, I've been banging my head against a wall for over 12 months now, and I have contacted the county council on numerous occasions about the bus coming through part of my ward that can't get through because of parked vehicles outside a particular chip shop. And the driver, we've witnessed it, the driver has to get out the bus to go into the chip shop to get the driver to move the car. Now, this is totally unacceptable. And I've given the council suggestions of how we can fix this, but nothing has happened. Nothing's happened. So hopefully after this meeting, if I can resurrect that particular problem, we can have a look at it. And that would bring me on also to perhaps another recommendation that can be looked at is let's have a look at the roads with the biggest impact on bus punctuality. I think from memory, a bus was stopped in Funangroyo because it had constant problems in getting through. I seem to have read that somewhere. And certainly, you know, bus services are paramount. We don't want to stop bus services because of inconsiderate parking. So yeah, I welcome the Welsh Transport Strategy and the Welsh Transport Plan that's currently out for observation. But I think that looking at the plan where it talks about bus gates, bus stop improvements, lay-by removal, that's an interesting one. Bus lay-by removal, because when the new Redrow estate was built in Buckley around 2013-14, Flintshire County Council closed, we're closing 2 of the lay-bys near the horse and jockey where the bus pulled in. They then created a problem where the bus couldn't pull off the highway, and it was that close to the crossroads they had to reopen the lay-by We advise the council, please don't do this. Look at what the potential issues are. And yet we have no detail on this plan. It's just a plan. You know, there's no detail as why you need to close that lay-by. It doesn't give us any information. So that would be useful to have. So I think really what we need to look at is in the recommendations, Chair. I accept the first two, but I think we do need to review the core bus network for the reasons I gave before, that Harden is completely missing off that. And I think we should review the bus routes that's had the biggest delays and cancellations. Yeah, and then to understand what those delays and cancellations are, what's causing all this, so we can do something about it. And that really goes on then to another recommendation where we could look at the roads with the biggest impact on bus punctuality. So I would propose recommendation 3, 4, and 5 should be those that I've just mentioned, Chair, if we can get a second there and the committee to vote on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, I'll second.
Okay, thank you. What I was going to ask was if the Chief Officer would like to comment on that first and see how that can be brought forward, or...
Yeah, I think one of the problems we've got is obviously we're in live consultation for the regional transport plan. So we can't, as an authority, we can't really take any action while we're in that live consultation period. We need to feed into the plan, is what I'm saying. So everything, I support everything that Councillor Pearce has said and agree with the comments, but it has to go through the regional transport plan. We obviously with the CJC, that's a mandatory function now. So it'll be the corporate joint committee that decides what happens to the network going forward and bus services and the investment and funding. So we as a local authority won't have as much say unless the only way will be through that corporate joint committee. So I completely agree with all the comments, but it needs to be directed through the regional transport plan and the CJC. So whether that recommendation can reflect that, that, you know, supporting what Councillor Pearce has said, but that the recommendation is directed through the corporate joint committee and the regional transport plan as a response to that current live consultation.
Okay, can I just ask then, Katie, should the core bus network plan that we've seen, I think it has been mentioned a while back, I think when we did have a workshop a few years ago, that the line from Buckley to Broughton should have been via Harden, but the plan was never changed and did actually go through Dobbs Hill, which it obviously... So I'm not sure that... I think we did discuss it, but I don't think the plan ever, or the map ever got upgraded.
Okay, if it's just a case of updating a map, then that's not a problem. We can update the map.
So, because obviously that will feed into the CJC, won't it? They'll obviously be looking at that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Do we need to do anything on that, or is that something you'll take away and look at?
No, I think if you want to include it as a recommendation, just that you want the map to be amended following this committee meeting to reflect the comments made by members, that's not a problem.
Okay, we'll leave that to the end and we'll come back as there are other speakers who want to come in. Councillor Coggins-Coburn.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Katie, for the report. I'd just like to ask, I mean, obviously, we've had some experience of the bus changes in my ward. So I just want to know, on page 302, paragraph 103, when it discusses the bus service support grant and the bus network grant, how are they administered? Are they administered through the council, or is it completely via these the grant mechanisms? You know, I don't know. Some of the problems with the punctuality and reliability, I noticed at the end of the list it said speed limits. How is the impact of 20 miles an hour impacting the bus punctuality? Because I sort of I understood that there was some hope it would actually help the buses, 'cause although they'd be going slower, there was a view that the traffic flow would be smoother. So I'd like to know if, do we have any data on what's happening there? On page 313, echoing what Councillor Pierce has said, I was also concerned about lay-by removals as well, and to be provocal for 30 seconds, in Gwyn y Mynydd, the lay-by that takes the buses off the road, also on that road going downhill are 6-axle articulated lorries with 45 tons of aggregate on them. So if they turn around the corner going downhill at that speed and there's a bus sat in the live carriageway, I can just foresee that being a huge accident waiting to happen. So that lay-by I would strongly oppose is not removed, but I understand from what Katie said previously that concern needs to be addressed through the CJC transport plan, I think. And that one, and then also on page 304, to nip back, why, again, sort of echoing what Councillor Pierce has said, I understand that in the compliance, I think it's part of the traffic commission. Yeah, it isn't. So 107 under the traffic commissioner, buses can leave up to a minute early or arrive 5 minutes late. What's the rationale for buses leaving their stops a minute early? That makes no sense to me at all, and I would have thought that that's worse than the bus being 5 minutes late, because if you get to the running and panting to the bus stop, and then all you can do there is just wave off the bus as it's left 45 seconds before you got there, it would be a bit frustrating. So if the chief officer is able to explain the traffic commissioner's rationale that a bus leaving early is somehow seen as compliant, that would be useful. And asking for a friend, as I think the terminology is, how any sort of bus service improvements I'd like to see, let's say to the F6, would be addressed via the CJC through the regional transport plan, I understand. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Katie, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I will ask Helen to come in on the funding, but all the best. There's been a number of changes. The best funding for bus services is quite complex, and it's evolved over a number of years and has been added to. You'll see the names of various different grants that Helen referred to in the report, which have been introduced at different stages since about 2001. And some of those have reflected devolution, where the responsibility of funding for things like fuel duty rebate was devolved to Welsh Government to then distribute it to bus operators in a different manner. Some of it has been as a result of funding that's has then been devolved to local authorities by Welsh Government following the pandemic. So as a loss of patronage to bus services. So it's hugely complex in terms of how it's operated. Up until 2020, we only actually had the top in 1.03, we only actually had those first two elements in the table. So that 1.3 million that's referenced there was as a result of the pandemic, where operators basically said that they could no longer financially, operate certain services because they were no longer considered to be commercially viable. So Welsh Government stepped in and provided that funding to local authorities to enable us to continue to support those particular services. So it's very different. But Helen will explain maybe in more detail in a minute how we organise that, because it is done on a regional basis as well. Our own revenue budget, we've been through numerous reviews over the years. The last one was in 2019, 2020, when we actually reviewed the map, the core bus network map that Councillor Pearce referred to, and how we actually allocated the funding, and we're tied into contracts with those subsidised bus services. In response to the speed limits, I am aware that Welsh Government, excuse me, I'm losing my voice as well. Welsh Government has been reviewing the impact of 20 mile an hour on bus services, and they've been working with bus operators and Transport for Wales, as well as local authorities across Wales. They obviously published their revised guidance last year on 20 miles an hour in July last year to allow local authorities to consider exempting major bus routes from the 20 mile an hour. And obviously we're going through that process separately in terms of those exemptions where feasible. So we are looking at some of those. I haven't got data to hand. That would be something we'd have to get from Transport for Wales and Welsh Government. In terms of lay-by removal, we've actually raised similar concerns as officers with ARUP and TFW, because it always causes concerns that, and some of the, to be fair to the bus operators, even they have raised concerns because they don't want to be stopped in live traffic. So it has mixed views in terms of the lay-by removal. In terms of compliance and the tolerance levels with allowing operators to up to 1 minute leave up to 1 minute early, I've always actually advocated that there's no excuse for leaving early. But the Traffic Commissioner obviously has decided that there needs to be a tolerance level, presumably because of different, people's watches are different to people's, what's on the bus service ticket machines that that the driver follows. So there has to be a margin of tolerance, and I can't comment on what that margin is. That's obviously something that's been determined by the Traffic Commissioner's office. So I'm presuming that's why we have that tolerance level, because of the variances in different people's timing methods. Hopefully that addresses all those. I don't know if Helen, if you want to come in any further on the funding.
Not too much more, no. So the bus service support grant is used to for our local bus services. So a proportion of that is given we manage it across North Wales. So that's goes towards our own subsidised services. And as Katie mentioned, the bus network grant was purely just to maintain the existing network. When the emergency scheme funding was withdrawn, that funding was brought in to make sure that the network didn't, no buses were stopped once that funding was withdrawn. So that's how that is currently being used, and that's sort of aiming so that those services are within the authority's control, and they can be that forms part of the franchising. We've got more, and it will work towards those goals of franchising as well. I think that's it. Thank you.
Chair, if I may come in, there is a review of all of those grants going on in the background by Welsh Government as well, to try and, because they're so complex, I think there is a review of transport grants generally to try and streamline some of those, and it's linked with some of the changes to legislation around bus reform, and so it will be in the next 3 years it will be changing.
Okay, thank you for that.
Chair, could I just ask a quick follow-up?
Sorry?
Could I just ask a quick follow-up, please?
Yeah,
Chair?
sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the information, Katie and Helen. It's really useful. I'm glad the Chief Officer and I are the same mind about buses leaving early, because that would just drive me bonkers. But anyway, the sort of question about the grants was more specifically about, as the Chief Officer knows, I was in conversation with the manager of a bus operator, and I was told that just thinking how to phrase this publicly, essentially the council should know about any operator, any companies getting money from the operators, because all the communications, like essentially the operator applies for the grants via the council, and that's how they get the grants. So that's what I want to know, is the mechanics of it. How does the operator apply for the grant? Is it via Flintshire, or is it straight to whoever holds the grant money? And a fresh question, but the chair may tell me to shut up, but I'll ask it anyway and allow the chair his discretion. How does the chief officer see the introduction of franchising helping the bus services here? I can see one of the other members with a thumbs up there, so obviously that's a good question, because that would be useful to know what the chief officer's plans are and how she plans to incorporate member concerns as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Okay, so I could come back. So in terms of how the operator applies for the grant, so they're two separate grants and there are different criteria for both grants. So I'll come to the larger one first. So the bus network grant, which is what applied after the pandemic, all the operators have to fill in an application form and provide quite a lot of information about their routes and performance and passenger numbers, the mileage they operate. So it is quite complex in terms of how they apply, and the criteria are stipulated by Welsh Government. The bus support grant, which is the 646,000 figure within the report, that's an historical grant that came about when, as I mentioned earlier on, the fuel duty rebate was devolved to Welsh Government. Again, there are different criteria applied to that grant in terms of how we allocate it. It was based on a mileage basis, so it's complicated, but it's essentially it was administered on mileage by those operators, and that's how it's currently applied in terms of those criteria. In terms of our own revenue discretionary budget, we, following obviously all the consultation we did back in 2018, 2019, we produced the core bus network map, which is where we wanted to prioritise our funding. We agreed at that point the different levels of frequency, and then we went out to the market and tendered those services and those gaps in services as well. In some cases, some of the operators would come back to us and say, well, I can do part of that service commercially if the local authority would consider a de minimis payment for certain elements of the journey, say in the evenings or early mornings or at weekends, as Helen mentioned. But there are some services that are wholly subsidised, where they're completely under contract and we stipulate the times. There are other journeys, other services that are, as Helen pointed out, that are commercial, but we provide the de minimis support to enable that service to operate. They just needed additional funding to be able to make.
Katie, you're breaking up there. I don't know if you're losing signal or.
Viable. I know Katie's been having problems.
Gone, I think.
Morning.
Hello. Okay.
I am still here. I've had to turn my camera off. Apologies.
Okay. I didn't catch the last few sentences. Okay. I think we've lost Katie. Okay. Dan, do you want to, Councillor Rose, do you want to ask your question, and hopefully Helen or Anthony might be able to help in Katie's absence?
Real, thanks. We're pointing people towards the regional transport plan consultation. I've had a couple of residents come to me to say that virtual room is a ridiculous way of doing it. They made it fancy, not functional, and I worry that the input from that will be impacted by the way they've done that. On those reports, they mention climate a couple of times, but they mention it in the sense of the roads themselves and the transport vehicles. Now, when we're talking about grant funding to buses and public transport, obviously the benefit of public transport is that it's a greener mechanism of transportation across the county. And I think one of the things we don't speak about within the grant funding or what money Flintshire itself puts towards buses is that benefits our climate, not just those people trying to get to work. It is better in the carbon reduction side of it. And I think that we should have some mechanism to include what money we put towards public transport in one of the previous topics we've had on the agenda in our climate strategy. And I think that's probably one of the key concepts here, that we're focusing on transport like it's a means to get to a place rather than actually a benefit in general to society to utilize public transport rather than individual transport. And I think that's what all our plans and all the regional transport plans seem to miss out on, that, you know, it's a societal benefit rather than just a necessity. And if there's a way of instilling that further into any of these documents that we've got, or what powers we've got over the new policies.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Rose. Katie, just to say, the last sort of 20 seconds or so of your, before you went off, we didn't catch what you were saying, you were breaking up.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have a comment there, and anything on Councillor Rose's.
No, apologies. I've been having network issues all morning. Sorry. If I drop out, I'll have to ask Helen and Anthony to come in my absence. But it's been hit and miss all morning. I don't think there's anything further to add to what I answered earlier on. In terms of the RTP consultation, we are going to be holding some drop-in events as well on face-to-face basis. So if people don't find the virtual rooms suitable, and I understand that those virtual rooms have been very, very well attended, and I certainly from the feedback I've had generally myself, but there are drop-in events for people who prefer to do it in person. So we'll publicise those as soon as we can. In terms of mechanism for putting the funding that we provide for bus subsidies towards reducing the carbon footprint, we'll maybe touch base with Alex Ellis outside of the meeting to see how that might be feasible. But yeah, and that's something we can feed back to the CJC as well about this, you know, the wider benefits of public transport. And I think we do include, obviously, in our council plan in terms of sustainable transport, and you know, so we have certainly reflected that in the council plan. But yeah, we'll feed that back.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Councillor Wakeland.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to couple of points. First of all, I mean, take my ward, for instance. We've doubled in size in the past 25 years, if not more. We've had no real bus service to speak of as a usable bus service since 2019. The reasons given are there's no data to provide, you know, to suggest that we need one because nobody's using the buses. But if we haven't got any buses, we can't pull the data out. We have two bus services. One's provided by Trans Cymru, which runs from Ruthin to Chester. Quite often the early buses, the bus is very old that it does it with, but the two of them. The early buses in the morning don't seem to like the cold, and quite often the very early buses don't arrive. Our service, the other one is the T29 between Wrexham and Mould, which is one bus that runs all day, backwards and forwards. The only, just say for people to use it for work, any kind of public transport from Pennyford, Pennymoney or Dobbs Hill, you have to walk to the centre point, which is the Pennymoney roundabout pretty much. So from Dobbs Hill or the far end of Pennyford, which is almost in Hope, you cannot get to Mould before 10 o'clock. On the Wrexham bus, you cannot get to Wrexham before 9. If you work in Wrexham, you have to finish before 4 o'clock, otherwise you can't get home. So this is some of the issues we've got. We've currently in talks with Ken Skates as a community. He's asked Trans Cymru if they can adjust the buses slightly. I just wondered if there's any support we can get from officers or members, you know, to back up that plan, maybe just to move it slightly. But that's something we're struggling with. Just to come back to what Councillor Pearce said earlier, there is one bus that goes through Dobbs Hill. That's the T29 from Wrexham to Mould, but it only does it 5 times a day in each direction. So that's the only bus through Dobbs Hill between Mold and Wrexham. And the final point on lay-bys, we've had one installed a year and a half ago at the top of our village as part of a planning application in 2019 for 200 houses on a road that hasn't been serviced by a bus in 6 years. So, you know, the plan needs quite an adjustment. I would say on the map, this one, but where it says Dobbs Hill, it should in fact say Harden, because most of the buses go from Buckley through Drury through Harden that way. I think just the Dobbs Hill bit needs taking out and maybe change it to Harden, because that's where most of the buses travel now.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Wakelam. Katie, any comment?
Yeah,
Forward?
obviously I'm aware of the ward issues that are ongoing, and we certainly had approaches from the local community council, which we're dealing with. And yeah, so we recognise that there have been requests to improve the bus services in the area. So I mentioned earlier on, there's the national review of all bus services across Wales in terms of the bus reform. So that to answer the question, I didn't answer Councillor Coggins-Cogan's question about franchising and whether it was a good idea. But that's exactly the purpose of introducing the bus reform, is to regulate the bus service industry in Wales, and that's exactly what's been happening in England. They're a bit further ahead than we are in Wales, but the whole purpose of the bus reform is to bring back some of that control, so that we can set the timetables, the frequencies, the routes. At the moment, we don't have the powers to do that where there are commercially operated bus services, and obviously if we want to run additional services in areas that are not covered by bus services, such as rural areas, we need the funding, and we haven't got that funding. So there are moves afoot to review all of the network and regulate it better, and that's exactly what the bus reform will set out to do going forward. We can update the maps as suggested by Councillor Wakelam and mentioned by Councillor Pearce earlier on to amend that to Harden, so that's no problem.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Katie. Councillor Banks.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank Helen for what is an excellent report. There's two sections that I'd like to highlight that I'd say are exciting for myself and hopefully for everyone else. They are both on page 306, bus reform and the investment zone. Now, bus reform, there is a link there which I would advise everyone to have a look at, which goes into greater detail over what Katie's just been saying there. So that's well worth a look at. And the investment zone. Now, never going to get sick of saying this about the aim for 6,000 new jobs, £1 billion of investment. I'm going to be specific here to Shotton in the fact of the plan that's just come, the placemaking plans that's just involved Shotton that we've just been talking about on a previous agenda item. I think that could tie in nicely with it does tie in nicely with this in a way, with the investment zone, with links from the town to the investment zone, and that's it, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Banks. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be a little bit parochial here, just for a few minutes. My interest is in the F7 and F7A buses that serve Trident, Leeswood, so forth. I've been doing some work on this to see if the F7 could be diverted by 2 kilometres, and that would increase the number of buses that Trident, which is, out in the sticks really. Double the number of buses it can have going into Mold, and also provide connectivity to Wrexham, Caergurla Station, and rail links to Liverpool and so forth. I've been dealing with Sarah Blake so far, just getting a bit of information. So who should I discuss this further with? Is it Helen or you, Katie?
No, it's Sarah Blake.
Sarah, okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Dolphin.
Yes, just very briefly. Obviously, the investment zone is massively important, particularly for the first 10 years of when it starts up. And I'm sure all but this council will push for bus services to go throughout the county. The people will be working in the investment zone from all over Flintshire and beyond. And so not just Shotton, but Holywell and Buckley and all other areas, Pennyforth, they'll all be wanting to get to the investment zone, and the investment zone is going to be there to support bus services. And so it's for all towns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Dolphin. Right, no further speakers. I'll just go. First off is Councillor Pears's recommendations, but the first one of those, if it's agreed by the Chief Officer that the core bus network map will be modified, can we include that as one of the action tracking events? And obviously, if the new map could be sent out to members, it shouldn't take too long, I suppose. And then just to correct that, then we can eliminate that recommendation, if that's okay with Councillor Pears.
Yes, Chair, happy with that. Put it on the tracker, and then when it's done, we'll know it's been done. So yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
That's good. And we'll then move to the recommendations, which are on 301, but also Councillor Pears added that to review routes with the biggest cancellations and to review punctuality. Could you just want to correct me on that? Reviewed punctuality?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Chair. Allow me to come back. Yeah, the one of the issues that Helen focused on was on 106, explaining the problems with punctuality and reliability, and one of them was on-street parking, motorists ignoring legal parking restrictions, and bus priority measures. So I thought that it would be useful if the committee could request a review of the routes that have the biggest delays and cancellations, and linked into that obviously would be the specific roads with its biggest impact on the punctuality, where perhaps cars are parking illegally, so the council can look at this further. I think the committee does recognise in the other two recommendations that there are issues faced by bus operators, but I think this is a way of the committee saying to streets, yes, okay, yeah, we accept there are problems, but by doing this other recommendation, can you look at this with a view of suggesting improvements so that the buses can be more reliable and punctual? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Coggins-Cogan, you are happy with seconding that? Okay, can I just ask Margaret, are you okay with the wording for that?
Yeah, could we just let Katie come in, please, Chair?
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, obviously in 1.06, we've mentioned already that there's the wider regional review already happening, which obviously is included
Sorry, Katie, we're losing you again.
in Appendix 3.
Sorry, Katie, could you turn your camera off, please? And hopefully we'll be able to hear you better. Thank you.
But what I think we should probably do is can you hear me okay?
Can now. Do you want to try again? No, Katie, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Katie, we can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Sorry, Katie, not getting anything there.
Can you hear me?
Do you want to try and repeat what you were about to say, Katie? I'm sorry, we're not getting any joy with that. I think, do we want to take the recommendations and obviously, if we need to address it again next month, then we can maybe do that. But in the meantime, the recommendations are as 301, scrutiny notes the report requested, and scrutiny notes the opportunities, and that we request a review of the routes with biggest cancellations and punctuality issues, and with identity of particular roads. I'm sure, Margaret, wording along those lines.
And the update of the core network map, Chair.
Yeah, well, we'll put that in the action tracking, won't we?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
fine, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, you okay with that, Margaret?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so we've had could we have a mover and a seconder for those recommendations as put?
I'll move, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Pearce, Councillor Wakeland, and can I have show of hands, all those in favour? Okay, we got there with that one. Thank you very much for that. That ends agenda item 7. We have run over the 12 o'clock slot for 2 hours, so I recommend that we take a 10-minute break now before moving on to the next agenda item. So if we can be back at 12:30. Thank you very much.
Chair,
I'm just going to start. Hopefully the live streaming will restart again now.
Okay, I think we're ready to go.
Live streaming now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back to the Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We have 2 agenda items to go. Agenda 8 is the street scene standards, a revised approach, and agenda item 9, which is the procurement of curbside sort recycling, which will be a part 2 item. So we shall continue on with the meeting now. Agenda item 8, street scene standards. Can I hand over to Katie?
Yeah, I'll hand over to Barry Wilkinson if that's okay, especially given my network issues going on at the moment. So it might be wise to just hand over to Barry to take you through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. This report sets out a revised approach to performance management within the portfolio and reflects a revised operating structure, which is set out in a set of overriding strategies, an example of which is included in Appendix 1. As you'll be aware, Street Scene and Transportation is responsible for a number of frontline services, such as waste and recycling, highways maintenance, winter maintenance, transport services, and enforcement services, to name a few. Street scene standards were last reviewed in 2019, and following significant change to the scope and budget of the portfolio, a review commenced in March 23, which retired the previous set of metrics. It was found that many of the previous standards were covered in national guidance or existing policies, and a single standard document was subject to external influence or set within policy decisions elsewhere. As said, Appendix 1 sets out how a revised operating structure for managing, monitoring, and reporting performance is linked directly to policy decision and measured against resources and risks when developed. Linking this to the corporate approach to objectives and performance management, this allows key strategies, waste, HAMP, for example, to act as a roadmap to achieve our targets and objectives across the service. Strategies tie together linked policies to deliver on the authority's objectives. These policies will set out KPIs, which will be presented to committees as annual performance or status reports, or through quarterly reports already scheduled. Risk management and impacts are set out further in the report, describing the approach as proactive and future focused. This sets out a golden thread from our operations to policy and allows policy changes due to future developments or resource restrictions to adjust the metrics accordingly. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over to members. Anybody wishing to ask a question? Just while they're thinking about that, Barry, can I just ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So when we started the task and finish group, there was talk of, about where we'd have a time scale for if a street light was out or a pothole was done, and we'd say it was 24 hours or 48 hours. or a week or whatever it was, we simply won't, as far as I can see, we simply won't have that information available to us anymore to know how long a specific item will take. And the way I read it is that over time, it will sort of be accepted that it, or it sort of looks as if it will be done in a, when we can, depending on resources and finances, not that we're going to give ourselves a time figure like 48 hours to repair a streetlight or fill a pothole or return for a missed collection or whatever. Is that how I'm reading it?
No, Chair.
Okay, good.
The timings, the commitment to policy, the commitment to performance is set out in policy. So what we're looking at is the removal of a single document that is at risk of contradicting policy or contradicting national guidance. The street scene standards as was allowed us to contradict or set targets that weren't reflected in policy or weren't reflected in national guidance. So a good example is HAMP. When HAMP came to committee, HAMP is revised, and along with HAMP came a number of annual status reports that will tell you that we have in HAMP a commitment to repair potholes dependent on how they're categorized within set timescales, and the annual status report will tell you how many times we achieved that, what percentage of performance we achieved. Exactly the same with street lighting. We will have repair times of 10 days, and then the annual status report will tell you how well we achieved against that performance target set out in policy. If we expand further into waste and recycling targets set by Welsh Government, they are all set and formed for the service to operate against and will be reported back annually.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. Cheers. Councillor Pearce.
Right, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Barry, for taking us through this. The chart on Appendix 1. We follow the flow, we get to the cabinet. There's then an arrow back to your objectives. So could you clarify that if cabinet amend your objectives, it could impact on the policies? And if the policies are amended, should they then not come directly back to scrutiny? It doesn't seem to show that on the chart. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to answer that, Councillor Pearce. Yes, you're correct. So what we're trying to show there is that the council sets objectives, that our strategies are there to try and meet with those objectives, whether they be that there's a new council plan being derived, but broadly we look at clean and green communities or access to services as objectives for the council. As those objectives change, then the strategies or policies may change with them, either in part or significantly. But absolutely any policy change will come back through the scrutiny committees before being presented to Cabinet with scrutiny's comments. Fundamentally, what we're saying, Councillor Pearce, is that strategies might have a 3 to 5 year life. The waste strategy has a significantly longer life than that. And the policies would have a shorter life than the strategies, because the policies are how we deliver the business. The strategies are what we're hoping to achieve.
Can I just come back to you?
Yeah, by all means.
So in what you're saying there, then Barry, if the objectives change, then impacting the policy, and it does need to come back to environment, should there be a dotted line between the policies and the Environment Scrutiny Committee indicating that when the policies are revised, it goes directly to the Environment Scrutiny Committee? Thank you.
It can do. It's there as an example. It's certainly not trying to rewrite the route that policies take through the governance framework. So absolutely, it will come back to scrutiny committee.
Okay, thank you. Katie, did you want to come in before the others?
Yeah, I was just going to answer your questions, Chair, and obviously Councillor Pearce's points as well, to add to what Barry said. And we were conscious that, and we've discussed this at the Task and Finish group a number of times, is that all the street scene standards was a document that described how we delivered the services. It didn't actually measure our performance. The whole purpose of what we're doing is we want a suite of metrics and performance measures that we can use to hold people accountable, to measure our performance, to report back to scrutiny effectively. So what this structure, which is outlined in Appendix 1, is an indicative, example of what we just done with HAMP in particular. So you've got your overarching strategy at the top, then you've got all the different policies. So to answer your question about, how do we set the frequency of inspections for potholes? How do we set the frequency of street lighting repairs? Those are all in those policies that sit underneath the strategy. We then will report on those, because we'll have at the back of each policy document, there'll be a set of KPIs to measure how we're delivering on those. So for example, if it's a 24-hour response time, we will have the metrics and the evidence to demonstrate how well we're performing against that. And the purpose of what, going back to what Barry said, is we'll bring annual status reports to report on our performance. What we were finding, and I think Councillor Dan Rose, we've had conversations at Scrutiny previously, is that you can't influence the street scene standards as a document because they're set in policies elsewhere, or they're set in national guidance elsewhere. So that's why we've had to try and unravel what we're doing, and this will be the standardised approach that we take for all of our performance measures, whether it's missed bins, whether it's abandoned vehicles. So we'll have policies for all of those things. That's not to say that we won't publish those performance measures. They'll be on our website so that you and the public know what to expect in terms of, well, this is our set frequency for missed bin collections. This is how we approach. So we will document all that on our website and in policy documents that'll be shared publicly.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Katie. Councillor Rose.
Yeah, thank you. I think with the previous street scene standard document, it was a very useful document for us as councillors, because it very clearly listed out what, when, why, where and how sort of thing. And I think that was the cause for the document for us. And it was also useful for the benefit of the public sort of thing, to point them as to these are the options and why. I think we're adding an extra complication in not having a single document to make it clean for the public, and see these are the options from street scene. Presumably with all these KPIs, I presume they'll be stored in a similar way where they can all be reported within one document, but the information as to how is really the useful bit to the public. From the Task and Finish group, obviously a lot of us were more talking about impacts to the end user and the KPIs and coming back to the end users rather than our operational standards. It was about a customer service base, as well as the legal requirements. And I think that's the bit that feels like it may be missed in some strategic documents, in terms of the actual operational customer services side rather than the policy requirement. And so some clarity in how those things are lining up. I think one of the other things in the Task and Finish group is we were talking about alternative measurements that currently don't get measured, which obviously won't be in the policy. So there were other opportunities to measure things that we were going to discuss that are now off the table by the sounds of it, if we're not going to do that document. And I think for me, the other side of this is obviously the recommendation is to note and support the revised document. I don't want to support it because we don't really know the document's essentially disappearing. We're not supporting a new document, aren't we? We're just saying that the scrutiny standards are going and there's no direct alternative. It just sits within other policies, doesn't it? So I'd like to make a recommendation that it's not a note and support, it's just a note that they've now been removed.
Okay, I'll note that for the moment. And Katie, do you want to respond to Councillor Rose?
And in terms of having a single place to hold all of those different standards, well, they'll be publicly available on the website. But also, we have the InPhase system, which is the system that holds all of these. So through the council plan and the quarterly performance reporting, we'll be reporting on these. and that will be the single source of where these will be held. I think the other aspect as well is, if you look at, just the example that's given in Appendix 1 for HAMP, we don't have all of those policies in some cases. So, we will need to develop some. So in answer to your question around alternative measurements and whether these are off the table, no, they're not at all, because, a good example is gully emptying. We haven't got a policy in place at the moment. All we have is that one line on that document. How we actually manage that needs its own defined policy. So there'll be further reports that come forward to scrutiny to actually, put new policies in place and decide what those measurements will be. So it is a work in progress. This is not going to, we can't just do it all overnight, but we've started that process. So, similar to the resource and waste strategy, we've started develop different policies around that. There'll be other strategies for fleet, for integrated transport that feed into the regional transport plan, and they will all have policies underneath them as well. So this is going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight, but the scrutiny committee will have input into that process, and nothing is off the table. So in answer to Councillor Rose's question, if you feel that there are alternative measurements that need to be factored in, then we'd be keen to hear from you about what those might be. And it may be that we need specific policies on those aspects. I do agree as well about the customer service side. It does need to be reflected as well in what we're doing. So we'll take that on board. So thank you for the comments.
Okay, Councillor Lloyd.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks. Just referring to 101, Barry, referring mainly to the household recycling centres, where it says these services are key to ensuring that Flintshire remains safe, clean and accessible to all. I just wanted to bring to your attention that lately a couple of residents have been to me to say they've been to the Sandycroft recycling centre and they've been turned away because the skips have been full. So I just wondered is there a policy in place to make sure that when the skips are becoming full, that they are replaced or emptied to avoid this happening on a regular basis? As mainly at weekends, so I've been told. But it must be frustrating to them to get there. And obviously the chance, if they're turned away, you might increase the fly tipping elsewhere. So I think it's important to make sure when they go, they can actually, there's a skip there so they can put their waste or recycling in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. I can't, Chair, I can't answer that here, but I'll certainly take it away and speak to my colleagues and respond back to Councillor.
I can answer it if need be. They shouldn't be turned away. That's why, they should be maintaining access. So we will take that board. That's an operational matter for us to address with the team. So thanks for the feedback.
I think just to clarify that Councillor McGowan will probably back me up on that one because he's had the same reports as well, Ryan, haven't you? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. Barry said there about 10 days to repair streetlights. In the contract we've got with my community council, it says non-mains repairs will be carried out within 10 working days and 3 days if the area is identified as vulnerable to the elderly or in a reported high crime area. So I'm assuming that there'll be performance figures for the 3 days as well. And regard Katie talking about the gully emptying, we do have gully emptying going around, but the problem we have is the culverts and pipes in between them. They are blocked and can only be cleared by jetting. So this schedule of gully emptying needs to include jetting as well, if you can, please. Thank you.
Okay. Katie or Barry, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I can come in. Obviously, those are specific to those comments are specific to particular policies, which we're not here today to review those policies. There may be further reports that come forward. The street lighting policy was actually recently reviewed through HAMP. So, but there'll be further policies that come forward to members for review, such as the one you just mentioned around jetting and gully emptying. So that yeah, we're not here today to review the specifics, but we can take those on board. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Banks.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, this is just on the point of Councillor Rose's. Before we go to the recommendation, would just like to point out that this review started in March 2023 and was included a member-led task and finish group set up through this very environment and overview and economy overview and scrutiny committee. So it has, members have had chance to put into this, and
I think we didn't conclude that task and finish group with the street scene standards. It got overtaken by events.
Okay, okay, sure.
So, Katie, your hand's still up. Did you want to come back on something there?
Yeah, I did, just to answer Councillor Banks, really, that I think it's been difficult for everyone to grasp what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to develop a suite of metrics that we can actually measure our performance against. At the moment, the street scene standards per se as a single document doesn't do that. So what we've been trying to achieve is having these set of KPIs to bring back to you as members so you can hold us accountable. At the moment, that piece of paper, that single document doesn't do that. All it describes is how we're delivering the services. It doesn't measure our performance. So we're trying to change that. So we need your support. What we're asking for you to do is support us in doing that, because this structure, this operating structure, will help us to hold officers accountable and report back effectively to yourselves as members. So that's what we're asking for.
Okay, thank you for that, Katie. Okay, Councillor Rose, I'm going to just come back to you with regard to the recommendation, because you wanted to make an amendment there, which currently is scrutiny notes the revised operations to take out the words and supports. So,
as has been said, there's more details coming. We've not got the full information here. We've clarified the customer services side, but it also needs to go into it. I think there's a bit more information we need on it, really, I think, before we fully support it as it goes along. But I'm not against the changes, and, there can be some good things that come out of this. But I think at the minute in time, it's just a little bit more information we need as to how it's working and what data we're going to see out of it.
Okay, so do you want to leave the recommendation, or do you want to make that change?
I'd like to remove the supports element, thanks.
Okay, so we have a seconder for that.
I'll second, Chair. And it's not because the process isn't supported, it's just that this is sort of noting a process, and at the end of the process, then we can support what comes out of it. So I don't want the chief officers or the officers to feel as though they're not being supported by the committee. This is a process, and we want to see what comes out at the end of the process and be able to support that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, fine. So we've made that amendment to that recommendation. So if we'll move to the vote on that then. So those in favour of the recommendation?
Chair, could I just have a clarification, please?
Yes, by all means.
In the recommendation that's in front of us now, it says that it notes that we no longer support the previous street scene standards. So if we don't support the revised street scene standards, we haven't got any street scene standards in place that we support.
Well, I would say that we note that it does say notes the previous street scene standards are no longer supported. It doesn't say that we support the fact that the street scene standards are no longer supported.
Okay, I'll vote accordingly.
Okay. So the recommendation, scrutiny notes the revised operating structure for performance management and reporting within the street scenes and transportation portfolio, and notes that the previous street scene standards are no longer supported. So it's been moved and seconded. Can I have a show of hands of those in favour of that? Okay, can I see the hands clearly? So let's make a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those against? 1. So that's carried. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes agenda item 8. And for Margaret and Maureen, we now move into agenda item 9, which is a part 2 item, and therefore webcast should be concluding at this moment.
Chair, can we just take the vote on the part 2, please?
All right, sorry. Can we take a vote that we move to part 2? All those in favour? Okay, that's carried. Thank you, Margaret.
I'll confirm when the live streams is stopped, Chair.
Okay, thank you.